All right, I have Congressman Todd Rokita with us today. As you know, that the Senate race in Indiana is very important to me, and Todd is running for the Republican nomination for the Senate, and so he's on the phone with us, graciously giving us some time this morning. Todd, how are you doing?
Hey, Todd, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
You know, the last time you and I spoke was actually November 8th, 2016. And
I remember it well.
Yeah, the night of the election. And you told me, and I agree with this, by the way. Of course, this was the night that Trump and Putin somehow stole the election from Hillary. But I remember that you told me then that Trump didn't hurt the folks down ticket, as all these experts were telling us was going to happen. He actually pulled some folks across the finish line. And so I agree with those sentiments, by the way. I'm wondering what effect Trump has, if any, on these 2018 midterms.
Well, I think he's going to have a positive effect, especially in Indiana. Everywhere I go, and I'm all over the state, just like I was when I was Secretary of State. We went to we drove 45,000 miles a year for 8 years, and we went to every county at least once every year. And I'm going to be doing that same thing when I'm the next U.S. Senator from Indiana, because that's where I get my marching orders. That's where I can talk with people, look in their eyes. I can find out what's important and equally important, what's not important to them. And when I'm going around this time, despite all the negative media coverage and despite the continuous attacks from even the Republican establishment, Trump does well. President Trump does well in Indiana, and that's why I'm proud to be endorsed by the Trump-Pence Indiana team from 2016, because they know I was fighting in the trenches, like your listeners were. And that was my point back in 2016 election. I remember it well, Todd, saying that. It's like Trump helped down ticket despite the Republican establishment working against him. And that's Luke Messer, one of the other guys running for Senate here. While we were trying to get Trump across the finish line, and he was pulling others across the finish line on the ticket that year, like Luke Messer was on national TV disparaging the president, basically working for crooked Hillary Clinton. And that has carried over, too, into this 18 midterm. And so I'm calling on all Trump supporters to vote for Todd Rokita this time, because we were together in the trenches and we were working against the establishment to make sure they didn't steal the election from Donald Trump and help Hillary Clinton. And can you imagine, Todd, if Hillary Clinton was president right now, what the Supreme Court would look like?
No joke.
It'd be terrible. And Luke Messer was for that.
Now, you've gotten some endorsements lately. Explain who it is that's endorsed you and why that matters to Hoosiers here in 2018.
Well, we have hundreds of endorsements. I'm very grateful for local elected officials who aren't part of the Republican establishment, who just want to do a good job all over the state. If you go to toddrokita.com, you will see, or if you go to sign up on my Facebook or Twitter page, we run endorsements, I believe, almost daily of not only local officials but grassroots activists. For example, there's a fellow who, during the 2016 election, you may remember, mowed the name Trump into a hillside. And if it ever gets warm enough in Indiana, he's going to do the same for me. This election.
Waiting for that.
He's a supporter, so I have people like that. And then, of course, the leaders of the Trump Indiana team from 2016, Rex Early, a former party chairman, but a good guy, never for the button-down white shoot establishment types, and Tony Samuel, the vice chairman of the campaign. They came out recently and endorsed me because they saw that I was the only one, certainly in the Senate race, and really amongst the entire delegation, that stood up with your listeners for Donald Trump. One, Luke Messer, we've already discussed, a never Trumper, and just don't take my word for it, Todd. Have your listeners go to toddrokita.com or put it up somewhere else so you could see the national TV footage where Luke was doing that repeatedly. Or Mike Braun, the millionaire who's trying to buy this Senate seat, which I think is repugnant, and he should be voted against just on those terms alone. He, a millionaire trying to buy the Senate seat, couldn't even find a dime in his stack of dimes to give to the president to help with the campaign. Nowhere to be found in 2016. He wasn't with us on election night, Todd. He was, who knows, he's probably voting for Hillary because he's been a lifelong Democrat. I mean, this guy didn't start voting Republican until 2012. That means he was voting for Obama or Hillary in 2008. That means all the way back as far as the county courthouse records go in his home county, Mike Braun has pulled a Democratic ballot every time he could.
So, and that's one I've seen those things reported and so forth. But I do know in 2008, as an avid listener to Rush, there was a thing called Operation Chaos. So I know that a lot of Republicans voted in the Democrat primaries. Are you saying that it was more than just that, that he voted?
It was, yes. Thanks for the clarification, Todd. It was much more than that. The courthouse records in the Du Bois County Clerk's office, that's down in Jasper, Indiana, as far as they go back, which is to 1980, Mike Braun pulled a Democratic ballot.
Okay.
In every primary until 2000. He didn't start voting until 2012. And the reason he did that is because I'm going back to my Secretary of State days when I was Chief Election Officer. But the reason he did that is because there's a law that says you have to get a party chairman's permission to run on a ticket if you haven't pulled a Republican ballot in the last election. So since he hadn't, and he wasn't going to get the Republican Party chairman's permission, he voted Republican in 2012, then ran for the state house in 2014. So he didn't need to get the permission. And then in the 3 years that he was in the Indiana State House, he raised our taxes 45 times, just like a Democrat would, including the state's largest tax increase, the gas tax. While at the same time, Todd, here's the kicker, not only did he raise all of our taxes 45 times, including the largest in state history, he lowered his taxes on his own business.
So opponents aside for a minute, and I know this is about, I know we have to pick, right? The listeners in this audience, me, Republicans in Indiana have to choose between you, Luke Messer, Mike Braun, and ultimately, my goal is to see Indiana regain this Republican Senate seat, which should not have happened with Donnelly winning in 12. But regardless, so what are the issues for you as a candidate? What do you think the most important issues are for voters to consider as they go to the polls here in the next few weeks?
Well, immigration, and I'm solidly with Trump in building the wall. For example, this atrocious spending bill that Luke Messer just voted for, I voted against. There were several reasons for that, and I can get into them. But one of the reasons was it didn't of the $1.3 trillion that Luke Messer and Mike Braun are going to foist on the heads of our children. This Republican Democrat complex here that's for the rigged system did not even give President Trump money to build a wall. There's some miles of fencing that have been approved. Mm-hmm. And that's why Nancy Pelosi is smiling ear to ear, because the fence doesn't do anything. A fence doesn't keep out drugs. A fence doesn't keep out people. None of the prototypes that President Trump saw on the border a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, he was looking at those prototypes, are approved in this spending bill. So no money can be spent on any of those prototypes. It's ridiculous. So immigration reform. I have the SLAPP Act. I would like to see that become part of our immigration reform. We have to defund and ban sanctuary cities. The best way to do that is to throw local politicians, Todd, in jail if they ignore federal immigration law. So the SLAPP Act, my act, does that. It would make it a felony for Jerry Brown, for that lunatic mayor in Oakland, Oakland, and for Rahm Emanuel to ignore law. Secondly, or third, I would say I want to make, and no other candidate is saying any of this, especially this, I want to make English the official language of this country. We cannot be a sovereign nation. We cannot build a wall if we don't have a wall, if we don't have a common language. And so that's what I'm looking for.
So are you prepared to introduce a piece of legislation? Because one of the things, and I'm not acute, but don't misunderstand my question, but one of the things that I, myself, and listeners of this program, I think get just, completely upset or, driven out of our minds about are candidates who, and again, I'm not accusing you of this, just help us to get there. Candidates that campaign on an issue to get votes or to rally the base or whatever, and you've seen this, you've been around this for a while, but folks that will campaign and then they don't actually do anything about it. Are you going to introduce legislation about this? What are your plans, I guess?
Yeah, a great question and a very fair question. I not only introduced legislation, I'm a co-sponsor of current legislation to do that. So I have a record backing this up. But more than that, look at my record when I was honored to be Indiana Secretary of State for 8 years. I campaigned when I was running for Secretary of State to have photo identification at our polling places. And guess what? We have it. Mm-hmm. And now, and we were the first in the nation to do it. And now 30 other states have it.
Which is a no-brainer,
so,
by the way.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, but no state had it. It was taboo to talk about. It was politically incorrect. And guess what, Todd? The Republican and Democrat establishment both came to me after your listeners put me in as Secretary of State. And they said, Todd, you can't do that. You're going to get us called a racist. This is the Republicans, the Luke Messers of the world. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I said, I campaigned on this. Of course I have to do it. I got to try to do it. And so I ignored them. And that's why the establishment in Indiana, the party establishment, and certainly the liberal establishment, they're not against me, but they're not for me. And they keep me at an arm's length because they know I'm not going to listen to them when they're wrong, and they're wrong a lot of the times. They're wrong about Luke Messer being any kind of strong candidate. He's going to get killed by Joe Donnelly with all his baggage. No matter if it's what the wife makes for a part-time job that she does from Virginia, whether or not they live in, the fact that they live in Virginia, it can go on and on. The fact that he was working against the president, or Mike Braun, you can't beat Joe Donnelly with another Democrat, and that's what Mike Braun is. You can't beat Joe Donnelly if you're going to be a hypocrite, raising all our taxes and lowering others. So when your listeners are asking who to vote for, I want to beat Joe Donnelly. I have a good record to do it. From a electoral standpoint, the state knows me. I know the state. I traveled extensively, and I have high name ID. But substantively, I also have a record that I do what I say I'm going to do. And to your question, I'm sorry to be so long in answering it. To your question, if that's what your voters are looking for, he does what he says he's going to do. He's straightforward. He's transparent. Then I'm your guy.
Okay, Todd, we're a little bit long here for this segment. Can you sit? I have a couple more questions. If you can sit tight, and we'll address these after the break. Is that okay? Just a couple more minutes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we're going to take a break, come back, and finish this discussion with Todd Rokita. You're listening to the home of conservative, not bitter talk radio. Back in just a minute. So I'm here with Todd Rokita. Todd Rokita is the current congressman from Indiana's 4th District, running for the U.S. Senate nomination for the Republican Party to face off against Joe Donnelly in the election, the midterm elections in November of this coming year. So we've been talking about a variety of things here this morning. And look, I wanted to give Todd as much time to articulate and to respond to some things here to convince you why he is deserving of your vote. And we're going to try to get the other folks on here too for you to make your own decision. But we've got Todd here today, and I'm gracious for his time. Todd, so here's my next question. So we have this, the age of drain the swamp, and it's generally not a good thing to be associated with D.C., at least if you're from the heartland, right here in the Hoosier State. So I've seen ads out there that depict you and Messer as being part of that, insider political class, part of the problem. And I'm not saying that they're true or not true. I'm just asking you how would you respond to that? How would you convince folks that
we're in a silly season and people are getting desperate. Mike Braun that's a Mike Braun ad, and he's trying to buy the Senate seat. So he has spent over $3 million on TV and radio, and he still can't beat me. Our polling has me in the lead. And so, you're going to see, unfortunately, you're going to see more and more of this. So, dogs don't bark at a parked car, right? Mm-hmm. But as to Messer and I, or the fact that someone's in the swamp, you need someone in the swamp to drain it. So it's not that someone's been in office that is the issue, like Mike Braun's trying to make it to be. It's what you do in office. And look at what he has done in office. Not only was he a legislator who gave us the largest tax increase in Indiana history and then lowered his own business taxes, he was on the school board for about, I think, 8 to 10 years. So he's every bit of an insider. He's been in elected office for, a decade and a half, Mike Braun. And at the school board, hold on to your hats, guys. Todd, your listeners are going to, if you're driving, grab the wheel by both hands. He ushered in Common Core in his county, in the school board. He took Obama race to the top bait money, and for the exchange for Obama's money, he issued Common Core. ushered it in. That is not the kind of guy we should be sending to Washington, D.C. So what do I do in Washington, D.C.? Well, all right, I've saved $6 trillion for our kids and grandkids. If Nancy Pelosi was still in controlling the budget, I'm vice chairman of the budget committee. If she had her way and the Democrats had her way, we'd be $6 trillion more in the hole right now, according to her last budget projection. So I'm a record of doing the opposite. Let's look at the last spending bill, that atrocious spending bill, $1.3 trillion. Luke Messer, absolutely for it. Got to go for it, because that's what the establishment of the rigged system wants. Because when we beat Luke Messer again, when he goes back to be a lobbyist, he's going to need to trade on that vote. All right. I vote against it. I already told you, because it didn't have funding for the wall. But look what it had funding for. Donald Trump and I want to end sanctuary cities. I talked to you about the SLAPP Act. This bill funds sanctuary cities. Donald Trump and I want to defund Planned Parenthood, because however you feel about abortion, we can all agree that taxpayer funds shouldn't be used to kill innocent lives. Luke Messer votes for funding Planned Parenthood. So does Joe Donnelly. So it's not that you've been in office, it's what you do and the votes you take and the accomplishments like I have with photo ID.
Fair enough. So let's say that you win this nomination, you win the Republican Party's nomination, you face off against Donnelly. How do you beat him? And maybe more importantly to our listeners who, again, are politically savvy, they followed us for some time, they remember Richard Murdoch, Todd. They remember, Murdoch primarying, Richard Lugar at the time. He beat him in the primary, and then only to lose in the general election and basically give this seat to the Democrats, which never should have happened to begin with. So how do you assure these listeners that have a perspective on history here that you can beat Donnelly and that you're, say, different, I guess, so to speak, than Richard Murdoch?
Well, first of all, I'm beating Joe Donnelly in polling right now. No, an incumbent sitting senator should be 15 points ahead of any challenger. And the fact that Joe Donnelly isn't, and that I'm besting him currently, is a great sign. Secondly, I beat Richard Murdoch too. Yeah, he ran against he ran against me for Secretary of State, and he's become since then he became a good friend. I want to make clear about that he
and I'm not trying to malign.
He later became treasurer, and we worked very well together. But no, he and I ran for Secretary of State against each other, and I won that race. So I don't know what else I can tell you about that.
Okay. So, but that's a legitimate concern, especially when you look at the balance of power. We have a one-seat advantage right now, and you look at all these midterms, the special election in Arizona, which is closer than people expected. You have Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, which, by the way, I think it's interesting. That the only way to win against a Republican is for these Democrats to run as a Republican. They're not running.
You hit the nail on the head there, Todd. That's right.
They're not running as liberal Democrats, which is what Donnelly's going to do against his opponent. Which he's trying to position himself.
Okay. Here's another difference, though. Here's what you don't know. I play smash mouth football. Okay. I'm from Northwest Indiana. I've been beating You don't understand. I've been beating Democrats all my life. Northwest Indiana is very heavily Democratic. Yes. I'm obviously a conservative, the most conservative guy in this race. How did I have political success coming from Lake County? You got to know how to beat these guys. And the way you beat these guys is you take it right to them. There is no one in this state. And look at the primary as an indication. Some might say, oh, it's getting nastier, it's getting this, and Todd Rokita is throwing punches and sharp elbows. No, I'm exposing your listeners to the truth of these other two guys and their baggage. I'm going to be exposing the truth about Donnelly this fall. That he votes with Bernie Sanders 85% of the time, that he gave $150 billion at President Obama's request to the Iranian government so they can do terrorism. That as he preaches to us about American jobs, he and his family own a company that outsources jobs to Mexico. Mm-hmm. All that's coming to the fore. And I'm not sure that happened to Joe Donnelly in the last campaign. It's happening this time.
Yeah, I don't think. In fact, we affectionately refer to Joe Donnelly. I have a parody song that it's Jihadi Joe, and I always give a disclaimer. He's not a literal jihadi, but when you give U.S. taxpayer funds to the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is run by a bunch of folks that effectively, are purveyors of terrorism, or working with, say, Hezbollah, those that engage in it on a regular basis, Hamas. These are folks that, we've actually got senator that has, like you said, funded the Iranian government, who's thumbing its nose at us on a regular basis, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Israel, whether it be, through their proxy wars and so forth. And that is a serious, I think, it's something that's been forgotten, but I think that you bring up an important issue. Is that something that you would do something, to try to undo this Iran deal?
Oh yeah, I take every vote. I lead legislation. We're working at it. That is not over. We have got to, I believe at this point, still undo the deal. You just, or find a different path than we're on now,
Sure.
at least, so that we can bring the Iranian government back to its knees. Because, there's cultures in this world, unfortunately, Todd, and you know this, that respect one thing only, and that is power.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them $150 billion is the opposite of that. And by the way, now there's news reports that not only has that money found its way to Syria, which we so it's against our interests there, but now that money has maybe found its way to North Korea.
Beautiful.
So the terrible judgment of Joe Donnelly will be exposed.
Well, you're right. I say on this program
by me if I'm the nominee.
I say on this show on a regular basis, American weakness is provocative. Folks go around saying that Trump is this great provocateur of governments around the world, but what has led to this provocation, say North Korea, say Iran, is American weakness. Now, that's not saying the military, that's saying the leadership. And so I'm encouraged to hear some of these things that you're talking about, dealing with these things head on directly, smash mouth football, as you say. So anyway, Todd, I appreciate your time joining us here this morning. Thank you very much for giving us a little bit of information about you, your candidacy, and why folks should consider voting for you in the upcoming primary. So I appreciate your time very much, sir.
Thanks, Todd, and I implore your listeners to vote for me, Todd Rokita, if you really want a true conservative and Trump ally in the Senate to take our country back and make it great again. Thank you very much, Todd.
Very good. That's Todd Rokita running for Indiana Senate seat for the Republican Party. You're listening to the home of conservative, not bitter talk radio. Back in just a minute.